Hello there. Alex Aronson here with Court Accountability Action, joined by my wonderful partner, Lisa Graves. Thrilled to be with you here on Court Accountability Action and Legal AF for a post-Thanksgiving edition. Lisa, how you doing? I'm still working off the tryptophan as had a really lovely day with my family. We're going to dig in today on, I think in this post-election period, we've just been sort of like processing, I think, a lot, particularly on the media response to Trump's election here, and then on the court, which is our constant focus, what has been a sort of a disturbing normalization of the captured, corrupted court system that really was instrumental in putting Trump back into power. We wanted to dig into a few of the stories we've seen in recent days that have had our eyebrows raised and have really, for me, underscored the importance of these new media channels and independent media forums for us to be able to talk about this stuff without the filter of anticipatory obedience that I think we're seeing from a lot of the mainstream media.
Yeah, Alex, it's wonderful to see you. And my determination this Thanksgiving week has just been to seize as much joy as possible and to not give any more real estate in my head to the madness of some of these Trump cabinet choices. So yesterday was sort of a moratorium on Trump world, but obviously it's affecting us all. And there are a lot of things to really unpack. And so I so value your partnership. Working with you and with Court Accountability is a great joy to me. And it's also a great, I suppose, consolation in the midst of this that we have a team together to help push back, to help fight back, and help make sure people understand what's going on and things they can do about it. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today and with everyone who tunes in.
Yeah. So why don't we dig in? One of the stories I was sort of most surprised to see, I think it was last week, NPR had an interview with sort of shadowy mastermind of this right-wing legal revolution, Leonard Leo. We've talked a lot about Leonard Leo here. If folks aren't familiar with this guy, he is the longtime co-board chair of the Federalist Society, until recently the executive vice president at the Federalist Society. He has masterminded a massive fundraising operation and influence campaign to not only shape the composition of the courts and pick the justices, but also really push the law in this extreme right direction, particularly on religious issues. He himself is connected to Opus Dei, which we've talked about on this program. Has a truly sort of theocratic vision of what the world should look like. And in recent years, he's moved beyond the Federalist Society, though he remains very central there, to try to infuse this theocratic worldview into other sectors of society. And he's, for years and years stayed sort of behind the scenes, not been a public persona. And so that's why I was surprised to hear him, sit for an interview with NPR, which, is part of the woke media that they're often, attacking. And it was a fluff piece, right? It was effectively a fluff piece. Steve Inskeep, normalized him, said things to him like, you care about the rule of law. Like, do you have concerns about where Trump is heading? Meanwhile, Leo has been instrumental in securing Trump's second term and in funding the organizations behind Project 2025 that very clearly are about to take the reins in pursuing this agenda.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of my local NPR, but I have seen this behavior from some of the national NPR approaches in 2017, 2016. At one point, their morning, so their lead anchor for their morning show said, "Is it extreme if a majority support it?" And I just thought, the definition of extreme isn't just, do you have a majority? The definition of extreme is actually in the substantive policies. And in this area as well, this idea that Leo, who uses advertising claiming he supports the rule of law, is belied by the evidence. Where was Leo's condemnation of the Supreme Court's decision granting Trump unprecedented immunity? Where was the condemnation of the guy who supposedly supports the originalist or textualist approach to reading the Constitution when John Roberts and his fellow Republican appointees decided unilaterally to disregard the Constitution's provision that the president's duty, his literal duty, is to faithfully execute the law, which is the opposite of breaking it, the opposite of engaging in criminal activity. And so for a national outlet of any kind, whether it's publicly supported or not, to basically embrace Leo's rhetoric, his PR, and give him that mantle, or at least assert or bless this notion that he supports the rule of law, when in fact the justices that he helped install on the court have engaged in wreckage of the rule of law by giving Trump basically a pardon retroactively, and a prospective pardon, in essence, for what he may do, as long as Trump claims that he's doing it as part of his so-called official acts. So, when for many years I've tracked Leo, but also as you have, Alex, but also in terms of tracking his activities in the public domain. But I've also tracked the Charles Koch, and his PR operation. And I used to say, when Charles Koch would get some good PR, it was, the best PR a billionaire could buy. And now I can say that about Leo too, because he's got $1 billion at his ready through Marvel Freedom Trust. His for-profit operation has brought in hundreds of millions of dollars, including more than $100 million from groups that he's helped fund. So this sort of PR that is in the form of so-called journalism in that particular interview by NPR, as well as some of the other interviews we've seen, that's sort of the best PR big money can buy. And it's our duty, our responsibility as informed citizens, as concerned citizens, to basically speak out when PR is masquerading as news, because that was just PR masquerading as news.
Yeah. And I mentioned anticipatory obedience. One thing that strikes me, we're going to do another hit soon on the Impoundment Control Act and the threats of presidential impoundment of congressionally authorized and appropriated funds. One of the specific things that Elon Musk calls out in those threats, that he's going to be driving through this Department of Government Efficiency, is the funding for the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, which is a publicly funded public radio, public media entity that supports NPR. And so, we don't have evidence, it's speculative, but as you see this sort of favorable, fluffy coverage from organizations like NPR, you sort of have to wonder. It's like not so different from the Washington Post, which we'll dig into too. Refusing to endorse in the presidential race, and these behind the scenes dealings, meetings with Bezos and Trump. And it just sort of raises real alarm bells, and again drives home the need for alternative ways to get the truth out there. And another point on this rule of law thing, I think it's one of the reasons I have real concerns with using rule of law as a touchstone for pro-democracy, pro-equality values that we hold dearly. The rule of law is malleable, right? And Leo knows this as well as anyone. The rule of law is, in this country, under the system we have sort of accepted, it is what the courts say it is. And so as Leo increasingly wields influence over the judiciary, directs the outcomes of Supreme Court cases through shepherding convenient plaintiffs and contrived doctrines to judges that he himself selected, the rule of law becomes what he wants it to be. So, I think we are at this, dangerous inflection point of allowing ourselves to fall into, an autocratic, hungry style authoritarian system where, what is actually deeply unpopular, policy outcomes that are deeply unpopular, like the erosion of the separation of church and state that Leo very much wants to see happen, are illegal. And and so I think as the media seeks to sort of maintain its relevance, maintain its funding, maintain its access, we risk sort of voluntary accession into this dark place that would be very hard to get out of through democratic means.
Yeah, I there's so much you said there, Alex, that I agree with, and I think is so important to understand. In terms of the media's effort to curry favor or try to avoid punishment, outrageous punishment, basically what would otherwise be unconstitutional censorship based on point of view. I know that there are so many good reporters and producers at NPR, and unfortunately, there is also this impulse to try to not offend, which is, which some interviewers or some personalities may engage in to try to protect the organization. Similarly, the Washington Post, there's so many good reporters that are there who have done tremendous work exposing corruption under Trump, the thousands and thousands of lies, and yet clearly there's a management structure there that is trying to put their thumb in favor of Trump in order to benefit Bezos's wealth. I mean, he's the third richest guy in the world. How much more money does he need in order to basically curry favor with a future Trump administration and government contracts? It's obscene, actually. And the fact that he's allowed the top of the pardon me, the top of the Washington Post to basically be commandeered by a former Murdoch guy who is very, I think reactionary in what we've just seen most recently in this attack on the fantastic investigative reporting by Opus Dei. But we'll get to that later.
Let's get to it now. Let's dig into that now.
One of the things that happened over this past week is that there was a book review of the book Opus by Gareth Gore, which is really an illuminating, very disturbing, and extremely well-documented portrayal of the history of Opus Dei and the history globally, not just in the US, but including the US. And as Alex mentioned, as you mentioned, sorry to refer to you in the third person there, but as you mentioned, Leonard Leo is a funder of the core headquarters, basically, of Opus Dei in the United States, in Washington, D.C., an entity called the Catholic Information Center. And so this book really tells the truth about many of the significant scandals and the agenda to basically put right-wing theocrats into positions of power in government and in society. That is part of the Opus Dei agenda. And so the Washington Post had a review that, was an honest and good review of the book, why people should read it, what its importance is. And then the guy who blocked the Washington Post at Jeff Bezos's insistence, apparently, from endorsing Kamala Harris and saying, in accordance with basically all the reporting of the Washington Post, that Donald Trump is unfit to have the absolute power in essence of the presidency, that editor then took his op-ed attacking the book over to the National Catholic Reporter, basically in service of Leo, in my opinion, in a way to try to protect the powers that be in Leonard Leo and his operation to capture the court and really remake American society into this theocratic worldview. Now, of course, that Washington Post, super manager did not, endorse Leonard Leo per se, but what he did was he leveled an attack on that book that certainly seems to be part of the attack, the PR attack of the Opus Dei defenders and defenders of Leonard Leo's operation.
Oh, I mean, it's staggering. And we should name the guy. His name is Matt Murray. He was formerly the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, a Rupert Murdoch rag, that is a huge part of the right-wing propaganda ecosystem that Leonard Leo is, central to, particularly on its editorial side, its opinion side. And he, his review effectively, brushes aside the extensive evidence of not only this kind of political ambition and influence and infiltration that Opus Dei has achieved, but a decades-long pattern of human trafficking and recruitment of vulnerable, often impoverished girls and young women into these lives of effectively, indentured servitude, where they work for free or at very low wages and are not allowed to leave. He brushes that aside and criticizes Gore, the author of this book, for his, failure to look at the kind of like spiritual goodness, the, all the good stuff about Opus Dei. And he says, how one looks at this situation is, effectively a reflection of one's ideological priors. And I'm sorry, but, I don't think it has anything to do with one's ideological priors to think that documented evidence of human trafficking is appalling and despicable and to be called out. And the idea that this guy is the executive editor of one of the most influential newspapers in the country is disturbing. And the beat goes on, right? Just today,
Yep.
the Washington Post has another detailed kind of long form piece on another huge hub of Leonard Leo's right-wing legal apparatus, the emerging power center that is Notre Dame Law School. Lisa, did you get a chance to check out this piece? It features my former law professor, my contracts professor, a guy named G. Marcus Cole. I remember it was like my very first day in Stanford Law School, and he was wearing his little bow tie, and it was contracts class, and I was ready to do contracts. And the intro to contracts it had nothing to do really with like the foundations of American contracts law, and he was steeping us in Ludwig von Mises and the right-wing law and economics project that the Federalist Society and the Kochs had been developing for years. And he's the product of this ecosystem, of this pipeline. And now he runs Notre Dame Law School. He was there at Amy Coney Barrett's big COVID super spreader event at the White House. And he has built, in partnership with Amy Coney Barrett, in partnership with one of her close friends, a professor there named Nicole Garnett, what has become increasingly influential center of gravity in the right-wing legal ecosystem, in the legal ecosystem writ large.
I read the article. I didn't realize that you knew him, Alex. We should talk about contracts one of these days and what's taught in contract law versus, kind of
I'm sure that will go super viral. I'm sure ProBoc will be clamoring for the contracts content, but.
I think, one of the things that has struck me is that, in the U.S. population, about 25% of the American population are practicing Catholics. And about 25% of the American population are atheists or agnostics. It's about equal. But on the U.S. Supreme Court, 100% of the Republican-appointed majority went to Catholic private schools, 100%. And 5 of the 6 of the majority of Republicans on the Supreme Court are continuing to be practicing Catholics, and some of them have very, very close ties to Leonard Leo. That's unusual, like as a proportion of U.S. population. We've never had that number. And then one of the Democratic appointees, Sonia Sotomayor, also was raised Catholic. But what you have in that 6-3 majority is people who are willing to rewrite American law, decades of American law that has protected freedom of worship by protecting the separation of church and state, which is well documented in our founding. The Constitution expressly provides that there should be no establishment of religion, and expressly provides that there's no religious test or oath for office. And yet these Republican appointees have been dismantling and wrecking, actually, that separation of church and state, and elevating religion not just as a shield to protect your own freedom of conscience, but as a sword to attack anti-discrimination measures. And so this idea of this big Catholic university, sort of the Ivy League of the Catholic universities, Notre Dame, having this real plugged-in pipeline, I think is really important to explore further. And the piece, really didn't get into some of the other components of that are disturbing. For example, that is also Notre Dame has a law school program that it looks like Leonard Leo is substantially funded, and that has sponsored trips for justices. So these sort of vainglorious speaking tours where Samuel Alito goes on a victory tour post Dobbs to Rome, that's also tied to one of these programs that has been specially set up at Notre Dame that has ties to Leonard Leo. So you have a situation where Leonard Leo helps these people get on the court, helps generate briefs, including from some of those Notre Dame law professors, to weigh in an amicus briefs, part of this amicus racket, in my opinion, before the Supreme Court. Then the Supreme Court justices that he puts on rule in their favor. Then he funds a program that helps reward them with fabulous trips abroad. It's, soup to nuts, a sort of a full circle influence operation, and it's happening before our very eyes. And I think it is grossly distorting the meaning of justice in our country. And also, as you pointed out, it changes the notion of the rule of law. Like the reason why the rule of law is not inherently exalt worthy. And I'll just share this. I know we should probably break and go to another program, but a number of years ago, as part of my work in protection of human rights and civil liberties, I was part of this delegation to Berlin, this Europol meeting, basically to talk about how do we protect human rights in a civil society? How do we balance national security interests with people's human rights. And while I was there in Berlin, I went to the Holocaust Museum in Berlin, and there were amazing books there. And one of the books was all the laws that were passed under Hitler's Germany, legally authorizing so much of the activity that resulted in the murder of millions of Jews from Germany and from Europe, as well as other people who were not Aryan in their background, whatever that means. And so that book, I don't have it in my house. I have it in one of my boxes. I haven't unpacked yet. But that book is the book of the laws that Germany passed to authorize the internment of people, the discrimination against people. Those were all lawful under German law, but it didn't make that legitimate or moral. And so that's another reason why this rule of law rubric doesn't get at the root of what the Constitution means in terms of its importance in protecting human rights.
Yeah, it's striking. So, just a couple more notes on this story, because I think it really explains so much of how we got here and where this is going. Right? They have created sort of this new locus for conservative power, right-wing power. The justices, as you mentioned, go there all the time. Kavanaugh, who, as the article notes, said he could never teach again after the, explosive scandal involving these credible sexual assault allegations that were just thrown out by the Senate and by the FBI, is now sort of a welcome celebrity. Kids are clamoring to be there. The Federalist Society is a hub for activity at Notre Dame Law School. The article mentions how even non-conservative students at Notre Dame sort of feel compelled to join the Federalist Society if they want access to this clerkship pipeline. This clerkship pipeline is essential. And Garnett, who is one of Amy Coney Barrett's closest friends, is really leading the charge there. It mentions that she has been in touch, sends letters to all 800 or so of the federal judges on the bench to sort of seed these students into these positions of power where they will be sort of cultivated as the next superstars, the next generation of leadership in this right-wing legal movement. And, frankly, we don't have a comparable infrastructure on our side. I think this is one of the, things we're trying to build toward and develop in our work at Court Accountability, in the collaboration with all the other advocacy leaders and legal thinkers and scholars that we bring onto this show. It's essential that we start to think about, what our own networks, what our own infrastructure looks like if we care about democracy. I think it's a stark reality. I think the idea that the press is sort of going along with this as like, this is like a welcome development. It's a very, very, again, favorable sort of fluffy article by a journalist who I have deep respect for. Anne Marima has done some really tremendous investigative reporting, and here she is sort of carrying Leo's water at Notre Dame. Certainly going to help them, move higher up the rankings list, bring in, more high-end legal talent there in service of this project. And then again, I think just to close us out, having alternative channels for getting these truths out there as these false narratives, as these distorted ideas make their way into the mainstream news channels is so important. So if what we're talking about resonates with you, please make sure to like and subscribe to this stuff, share it with your friends, help us build a thriving, strong network for a pro-democracy movement, a pro-democracy legal movement in what are sure to be perilous times ahead. So happy Thanksgiving. Hope everybody had wonderful times with their families, feel well rested, well fed. We'll keep the fight going on. Have a great day.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.